The Panasonic S1H was released in 2019, almost 6 years ago. But even in 2025, and despite the release of the S1R, the S5 IIX, and the GH7, it's still technically Panasonic's flagship hybrid camera. Not only that, but it is Panasonic's only Netflix-approved hybrid mirrorless camera, and the first ever mirrorless style hybrid camera to be Netflix approved. And you know what's not currently on the Netflix approved camera list? The Blackmagic Pixel 6K. Just saying. In this video, I'm going to be reviewing the S1H through a 2025 lens and answering the question, is the S1H 6 years later still deserving of being the flagship Lumix camera? If you've been here for my previous video where I sold my Panasonic S5 IIX for the original Panasonic S5, you'll know I single-handedly uncovered a digital sharpening camera conspiracy which affects all recent Panasonic cameras, something that for some people might ruin your entire experience with those cameras, and something that a lot of, shall we say, more popular YouTuber filmmakers have refused to acknowledge. This is an all the president's men type situation.
They follow the money. What do you mean? Where? Oh, I can't tell you that.
And if it sounds fake to you, just understand, it's real to me, damn it. And don't worry, I will dive into that problem and show you conclusive proof of what's going on comparing the new S5 IIX footage to this camera and exactly where Panasonic may have lost their way. But first, what does Netflix approved even mean? This is most definitely a bit of a vanity metric. It means that if you were to shoot a Netflix show and you were filming with an S1H, Netflix would not tell you to change cameras? Or would they? I mean, the truth is, they could very well suggest you change cameras and use something more high-end. In fact, they probably would suggest that because they are not filming Netflix shows on S1Hs. They're using ARRI cameras and Sony Venices and actual cinema cameras that your poor ass doesn't have access to. But rest assured, if you were shooting a Netflix show, your wealthy ass would have access to them. What Netflix approved really means is simply that these particular cameras meet their quality approval standards, that these cameras can shoot a good enough image that they would work, visually speaking, for Netflix based on Netflix's testing of them. They've graduated from camera school with flying colors, and that is a good thing because it does speak to a certain optical quality all the cameras on the list possess. But don't worry, there's a million examples from films to TV to doc work on Netflix that was most definitely not filmed on Netflix approved cameras. So please understand that it is not the camera you use that Netflix doesn't approve of. It's your shitty films they don't approve of. And no specific camera is going to change that. Sorry. So all these I made a Netflix level film, how to get the Netflix look, is the biggest pile of clickbaity horse manure you could be sold. Sorry, it does make for a good title though. This camera cost $4,000 when released. I picked mine up for around $1,300, making it cheaper than even the Panasonic S5 II, never mind the 2X or S1R. And that is the beauty of the camera wars that are currently raging on your YouTube feed. If you're patient enough and you don't buy the shiny new camera, you can get epic deals that will provide far more value when measuring bang for your buck. And rest assured, right now, if you can get an S1H for this price, you are most definitely getting the most bang for your buck out of any hybrid camera, even in 2025. Price to performance here is off the charts. This was one of the first cameras to allow filming in 6K open gate, which means it's perfect for the new range of affordable anamorphic lenses that are now available from companies like Blazer and make this kind of the perfect choice if anamorphic is what you're into. The camera can do all eye and long GOP recording in all different flavors of cinema 4K, UHD, and HD. And while you can't record ProRes internally like the S5 IIX, you can record to either B-RAW, ProRes, or ProRes RAW using an external monitor. This camera has shutter angle. You can film in true 24 frames per second. It has anamorphic D-squeeze modes, waveforms, and basically all the cine style settings Panasonic has become so well respected for. It's also pretty fantastic in low light. It might not be quite Sony good, but if you like to cruise the streets at night, filming in dimly lit alleyways capturing flickering neons, this camera is going to be a great option. Dynamic range is on par, if not better than the newer Panasonic cameras, and that thick V-Log codec gives you plenty of latitude for color grading. And I think if you were to talk about why the S1H is such a good camera and why it may still be better than newer Panasonic cameras, you have to talk about its build quality. You know, I thought the S5 IIX was chonky. Wow, the S1H is a whole new level of chonk. It's bigger and heavier, but it also might be one of the best hybrid camera bodies ever made. Not only does it have a fantastic articulating screen, the screen is also tiltable, making it much better for filming than the standard flippy LCD screens. This is the feature that you want all mirrorless cameras to have because it means that you no longer have to worry about accidentally snapping off your LCD screen when you have it flipped out in the traditional fashion. The camera also has an excellent quality EVF, maybe the best of all the Panasonic cameras that feature one. And the battery life on this camera is also fantastic, lasting a solid 2 hours or more. You can also plug in the DMW XLR1 adapter to the top of the camera if you want to record XLR audio through preamps into the camera. But the internal audio preamps of the camera itself seem to be pretty good. But the smart features don't stop there. This camera has a little top screen, which gives you a quick breakdown of important settings like your resolution and frame rate, ISO, shutter, battery life, and picture profile. In fact, this little LCD screen makes you want it on all cameras as it's super helpful in keeping an eye on your settings as you film and when it's dark. It also has 2 tally lights so you know when you're recording. Yes, this camera does have a full-size HDMI port, and yes, you can charge this camera via the USB-C port, and the venting all around the S1H means it's one of the cameras you can be very confident will never overheat regardless of the conditions. And you can record to dual SD cards for redundancy. You also get a BNC out for time code on the front of the camera, another cinema feature that very few mirrorless cameras have. But unlike all the other hybrid Panasonic cameras, this one has an OLPF filter to minimize moire and aliasing. Now, when I first reviewed the S5 IIX, I didn't notice moire patterns too often in my work. But as I continued to work with it more and more, there were definitely instances where this was a problem. But this OLPF filter does something else important, which ties back in to the digital over-sharpening problem that newer Panasonic models have, at least if you believe my conspiracy. It helps to soften the image, a pleasing kind of softness that, yes, feels more filmic and organic and less, yes, digital. And again, if you're a watcher of my channel, you know this is something I like to wax lyrical about all the time. I hate the overly sharp look of the Sony cameras, for example, but I hate the overly sharp look of all modern cameras. I use vintage lenses to mitigate what these high-resolution sensors do to our images. I use filters on almost all my shoots. I shot a feature-length documentary entirely on Leica Almarit vintage lenses rather than easy modern zooms, purely to get away from all this digital BSing that unfortunately we've all become so accustomed to. And this is where my camera conspiracy kicks in. Panasonic's older cameras do have a pleasing softness to their image, something that I thought made them look far better than Sony cameras, or at least they did. They did have a less digital look right up until they introduced their new phase detect autofocusing system. You know, the autofocusing system that actually works. And as someone explained it to me in my comments, for phase detect to be the most effective, it needs a sharper image to utilize for its phase detect points. Thus, the need to over sharpen the image to allow the phase detection to work in the most optimal fashion. Now, I don't know if that's 100% true, but I do know that it's created a big problem. You see, while we all rejoice when Panasonic introduced their phase detect autofocus, yay, we finally have autofocus that actually works and rivals Sony. It's a miracle, praise Lumix. But while we all celebrated, perhaps that celebration came too soon. We did not realize what we were losing.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
To get this flashy new autofocus, the trade-off was losing that lovely, beautiful, organic image quality that is very evident in a camera like the S1H. Now, maybe you don't notice this digital overprocessing that's happening on the S5 IIX. It certainly took me a while to really process it, no pun intended. But like Andrew Tate, once I saw the Matrix, I realized I had to escape.
I think the goal is to control people's minds to a point where they don't discuss anything that's important.
Initially, I loved using the S5 IIX, but I just couldn't get over the feeling that this sharpening was really diminishing the quality of my video work with it. So eventually I downgraded back to the little old original S5. But the original S5 did lack some very important features that I really value in a camera that the S5 IIX had. Specifically, the open gate mode for anamorphic filming and a full-size HDMI. So I upgraded to this S1H, which really had the best of all worlds. Now, if you don't believe that this over-sharpening issue is an issue, I want to throw up a couple of side-by-sides of the older Panasonic cameras versus the S5 IIX. But not only that, I want you to take a close look at this S5 IIX footage. This footage is filming in 5.9K B-RAW. Now, a lot of people have said that if you film in B-RAW on the S5 IIX, you don't run into the same over-sharpening issue. But just look at this footage. Now look at the level of detail and pores on my partner's skin. This is filmed in B-RAW with vintage lenses with a 1/8 ProMIS filter, and you're still getting this crazy hyper sharp image. You may have heard of Moore's Law, but I'm introducing Pores Law. This law states that if you can see the individual skin pores of the person you're filming in a relatively wide shot, then your camera is way too fucking sharp. The S5 IIX in its least over sharpen mode is failing Pores Law. In contrast, take a look at the Panasonic S1H filming with the same vintage lens in B-RAW without a filter. Now, I know the lighting conditions are very different, but do you see what I'm talking about? Some conspiracies shouldn't be dismissed because some conspiracies end up being true. I think Panasonic are going down a dangerous route, which is fundamentally detracting from what made them such a great alternative to the Sony fuckboy filmmaker trend. They need to remain that alternative with the type of image that brought them to the dance. Are you listening, Lumix? Don't worry about 8K. Worry about getting rid of the over-processing. Let's get back to these beautiful S1H vibes. Because looking at this footage, I can confidently say, in my opinion, the S1H still has the most pleasing, most filmic, most cinematic looking image of the Panasonic hybrid line of mirrorless cameras. It does not have that over-processed, over-sharpened look, even when filming in 6K. This camera is almost exactly what I wanted my S5 IIX to be, and I just really appreciate the image coming out of this camera. In fact, what I'd really like to do is have this camera plus a new Panasonic EVA 2 or S1H2 to replace my Sony cameras for all of the work I do, both corporate and documentary, and hell, maybe even make my next narrative film around these cameras. This camera seems to walk the perfect line between a true cinema camera and the convenience of a hybrid camera. It provides me a look good enough to work for cine style shoots, but enough additional benefits and compact size that means it's a lot quicker and easier to work with in comparison to my Blackmagic cameras. It is almost like a Blackmagic 6K full frame light. You get a nice, pleasing image. You get B-raw if you need it. You get anamorphic modes, and very importantly, you get image stabilization, which as someone who films constantly on non-stabilized prime lenses, handheld, is very helpful. Also, this is one of the few cameras you don't have to rig out to film with. It's heavy already, and with IBIS, you don't need to add weight to the rig for smooth shoots. The battery life is amazing, so you don't need to add an external V-mount battery to keep it charged through the day. And the EVF and LCD screen are top quality, so you can actually use them to judge your image rather than attach a monitor. Shooting with this stripped down is a pleasure. Shooting this built up is a pleasure. It's just a pleasure all around. But I really think utilizing this body-only style makes the camera almost the perfect travel cam. I know that sounds crazy because it's so big, but I think this design is much nicer than the S5 IIX for video work. And look, we haven't even talked about photography. This is a fantastic stills camera. That's not something I personally use it for, but having the option makes this camera like one of the greatest all-rounders to ever play the game. And so in 2025, I have no problems recommending this camera over anything new Panasonic has come out with. In fact, I would urge you to try this camera instead. And when you take into account how cheap it is, choosing the S1H is an absolute no-brainer. Well, it would be if not for one giant glaring massive problem: autofocus. Now this camera sucks for autofocus. There's no getting around that fact. And I can freely admit that a lot of camera users desperately need good autofocus for their work. Now me personally, every interesting project I ever do is with manual focus lenses, but I use autofocus all the time for my corporate work. So if you're an autofocuser, this is not the camera for you. And you should absolutely look at something like the S5 IIX if you want that great Panasonic features with the crucial autofocus ingredient. Just don't come crying to me when you're staring at every skin pore on your model's face and wondering, why it looks so weird. And look, I will freely say there are a few other advantages in going with the S5 IIX. It does have an improved color science over the S1H, which gets away from the pink skin of this old style Vlog. And the B-raw on the S5 IIX works more like a raw codec on that camera than it does here on the S1H. On the S1H, I'm seeing very minimal improvement when compared to normal codecs, whereas in the S5 IIX, I'm seeing that there's a lot more juice that can be squeezed when you're filming in B-raw. And the S1H still suffers from a lack of slow motion options. You can only utilize 60 frames per second in 4K with a Super 35 crop, and you lose the 422 color space going back down to 420. And the S1H's rolling shutter is definitely not ideal. It looks to me to be similar to that of the S5 IIX, so don't expect any improvements in that department. These are things to know before you jump on eBay and start looking for your S1H. The improvements in the newer Panasonic cameras are not exclusively autofocus based. Just choose wisely. But for all the manual focusers in the chat, I think the S1H is the best hybrid mirrorless camera I've used. I still prefer the Blackmagic 6K full frame when we're just talking purely image quality, but when I don't feel like heaving that ungainly pocket cinema shape around, the S1H is the perfect alternative. If you want to support my work, you can watch my feature films now streaming for free on Amazon and Tubi, links in the description. And if you want more personal specific advice on how to go about making your own film, you can book a one-on-one consultation with me. As always, I am the Savage Filmmaker, and I'll see you when I see you.